My dear friends, welcome to the channel. Today we hear the biography of Sadhu Sundar Singh. He came from Sikh family. He's a mighty man of Jesus Christ. Without wasting time, let's start the video. The Ludhiana Express was thundering across the Punjab plain, and although he could not yet hear it, young Sundar Singh, crouching in his room, knew it would pass along the track bordering his father's estate in half an hour's time. There was no doubt about that. The train was always punctual, and very soon now he would put his plan into action. Time was running out. He had decided that if the unknown God to whom he had been praying so desperately did not reveal himself before 5 o'clock that morning, he would fling himself on the line for the train to pass over him. He could bear the turmoil in his heart and mind no longer. At 15 years of age, he was prepared to commit suicide. And strangely enough, it was the mother whom he had loved so ardently and who had so loved him, who had been largely responsible for bringing about this state of mind. His mother had always been known in her family and the community in which she lived as a deeply religious woman. Certainly, her little son knew her to be so. At a very early age, he was made aware of it. When he woke each morning, he saw his mother already bathed and dressed, studying over the Bhagavad Gita and other Hindu scriptures. He knew she was seeking something or someone she could not see, and this consciousness of the unseen was early impressed on him. She instead, as soon as he was old enough to understand that he must follow the same pattern, he must be bathed, then learn something from the holy books before he had his breakfast. So deeply was the habit ingrained in him that although, when very small, he sometimes demanded unsuccessfully that he must have his breakfast first. It soon became his second nature to rise, bath, then apply his mind to the books before giving a thought to food. Throughout those early years, when he grew from babyhood to childhood, his mother was the dominating influence of his life. She was always there, and she was always conscious of him. He knew that he would see her in the kitchen, superintending the cooking, doing much of it herself, while the servants busied themselves cleaning, patching, and carrying. But from time to time, her gaze would dart in his direction, and a little smile come over her face when she caught his eyes. When she set the big brass tray of food in front of her and the other members of the family sitting around, she was never too preoccupied to notice when he opened his mouth and immediately puffed into it a little piece of chapati dipped in one of his favorite spices. She knew which flavors he liked best, and although he did not always get exactly what he wanted, she explained patiently that what she was giving him was good for him and would make him grow strong like his brothers. When he told it to her with something he had discovered, so wanted her to look at, she would put aside what she was doing and give him her attention, and he always knew where to go when he was hurt, sobbing out his short-lived grief on her bosom. His mother was the center to which he instinctively gravitated, and from which he was never turned away. She bathed him, rubbed him in oil, washed his thickly growing hair, fed him, and took him with her to the Hindu temples, where she went to worship. Although a Sikh, she did not believe that spiritual truth was only to be found in the religion of Sikhs. In fact, the book to which she introduced him, acting as his first teacher, was the Hindu Bhagavad Gita, and by the time he was 7, he knew it by heart. It was one of the highlights of his young life to be taken by her across the dusty plain to the jungle in which an old sadhu lived, to be tested in his knowledge and understanding of it. The old Sadhu lived alone in the jungle, withdrawn from the world of man in order that he could the better seek the unseen. There was calmness about him and a dignity that was slightly awesome and yet appealing. Sundar was not afraid as the old man looked down on him and started asking him questions. And he answered clearly and confidently. Tell me, Sundar, how can we please God? By obeying the laws our fathers have taught us, Sundar replied. Good. Is there any other way to please God? We please God when we think about Him. We please God if we do not want to be rich, if we do not want to have a lot of money. We please God when we are poor and live alone far from the other people. We please God when we try to find peace, like the sadhus. So the examination went on, the old sadhu nodding approvingly. The boy answers well. He told Sundar's mother, perhaps one day he will become a sadhu. Nothing could have pleased her better. This would be the height of her ambition for her son, and Sundar realized it. He was too young to think much about becoming a sadhu, but he was not too young to begin to wonder what it was that his mother and the religious people to whom she went was seeking. His mother explained as best as she could what it was. There was a peace of heart, a peace in one's innermost being that could only be obtained by earnest seeking, and it was the greatest treasure anyone could possess. Worldly success, earthly enjoyment, the possession of wealth and power, all the variety of gratifying experiences that people according to their temperament shout for, were not to be compared with it. This peace of heart was spiritual, and it was completely satisfying, but it was very difficult to obtain. She wanted it herself, but even more, perhaps, she wanted her little son to have it. You must not do anything wrong, she told him. This is very important, and what is more, you must be kind to other people, especially to people in trouble. He saw that she always gave food to beggars and to the holy men who wandered from village to village, the sadhus and sannyas who had renounced their homes and their families, their money, everything, in order to seek peace and deliverance from the wheel of life with its endless reincarnation. The sadhus had chosen the path early in life, while the sannyasis had done so much later, often when already entangled with the claims of family and properties, and perhaps of death. Whatever may have been the background from which they came, they had now taken the path of renunciation, and Sundar's mother respected them for it. It was an act of merit to provide them with food and shelters as they passed on their pilgrimage from one shrine to another. However, dirty and unkempt they were, they who renounced the world were more to be venerated than they who ruled it. Not that Sundar's mother could not discern differences even between the holy men. She was a sincere and intelligent woman, and since she was determined that her youngest son should have all the spiritual help possible, she made her choice of teachers for him very carefully. She put him to study under a Hindu teacher and a Sikh sadhu, and they both found their young pupil disconcertingly earnest in his desire to discover for himself the peace they talk about and read to him about. How was it obtained? He asked them questions that perplexed them, and he would not accept their explanation that it could a very long time, and that as he increased in knowledge, the problems that he had in his mind about it would gradually disappear. He was increasing in knowledge as he studied under them. He argued, but instead of disappearing, the knowledge he gained only made him more worried. They explained that as he grew older and more experienced in spiritual things, he would understand. But suppose I don't grow up, he insisted. Suppose I die when I am still young and have not got it. The answer to that one was easier. If you die when you are young, then you will get this peace in your next rebirth. If you keep on trying for it, and if you not the next, then the one after, or the one after that. If you keep on trying, and now you are too young to worry about these things. Go along and play. They told him, and his father said the same. It wasn't natural for a boy of his age to be worrying about these things. He ought to be out with his older brothers, joining in their games, and he ought not to stay up so late reading. It was bad for his health. I expect you get it from your mother, he said with a shrug. He was a good Sikh and respected his wife, even approved her religious tendency up to a point, although he felt she went too far when it came to impressing them on young Sundar. Yet the freely expressed his intention gratification at his youngest son's behavior in the matter of the stolen 5 rupees. This incident was one that was forever engraved on Sundar's memory. It started on the day his father gave him a few coins to spend as he liked, and he ran off happily to the bazaar to see what he could find. On the way there he saw an old, low-caste woman huddled up by the wayside. She wore only a few thin rags, and as Sundar approached her she automatically gave a pitiful whine and held out a thin, claw-like hand, begging. It was no unusual sight to him, but this time Sundar's heart was touched. The weather was cold, and he was reminded of his mother's instructions about being kind to people indeed. Instead of going on to the bazaar to spend his money, he impulsively gave it all to the old woman, then ran home to find his father. There's an old woman begging on the road, he said breathlessly, and she hasn't got enough clothes. She's shivering and she hasn't got a blanket. Please give her money to buy a blanket. Oh, I know that old woman, his father replied. I have helped her several times in the past. Now it's someone else's turn to do something. But suppose no one does help her. Suppose she dies for cold. His pleas were in vain. His father refused to listen to him and walked away. Disappointment Sundar turned away too, but he could not forget that old woman, and the desire to help her grew into a determination to do so. Then he saw a coat of his father's laying on a bench, and looking quickly round to make sure he was alone, he slipped his hand into the one of the pockets and drew out some coins. 5 rupees enough to buy the old woman a blanket, he thought, and although it was too late to do anything that day, he decided he would take the money and give it to her the next morning. He hoped his father would not notice the loss of the coins. But his father was more aware of how much money he had in his pocket than Sundar realized. Sometimes later his father came in and picked up the coat and searching in his pocket, drew out the few coins left there and said with a puzzled frown, I had more than this. Then he looked at Sundar and asked, have you taken any money from my pocket? No, said Sundar promptly, and to his relief his father said no more. His relief lasted only a very short time. If he had never been conscious of it before, Sundar realized now, with acute discomfort, that he had a conscience. He went to bed that night feeling very unhappy, far too unhappy to sleep. On the one hand, he argued with himself that he had been right in wanting to help the old woman, but on the other hand, his conscience told him he had been wrong to steal the money, especially from his own father. Exactly what he said to his father he did not remember, except that everything came out. The desire to help the old woman, the thief, then the lies followed by a sleepless night, and the realization that he must return the money, not secretly but by making a full confession. What he never forgot was his father's reaction as he stood there, manfully telling the whole shameful story, instead of the expression of the anger he had expected, and the harsh upbraiding followed perhaps by a thrashing. He saw tears come into his father's eyes. saw him, told out his arms, and heard him say with a little choke in his voice, "My son." Then feeling himself hug, feeling his father's hand stroking his head, he heard the words, "My son, I always knew I could trust you." Now, I was not wrong. His father still trusted him. All his remorse and shame and fear were submerged in a flood of relief and gratitude as he realized that he was completely reinstated. It was as though he had never stolen the money, never told a lie to cover it up. That dark incident was not only forgiven, it was forgotten. Nothing more was said about it, but as his father turned away to go off to his businesses, he said, "I'll buy a blanket for that old woman with these 5 rupees." Then he added with a smile, drawing a coin out of his pocket and handing it to Sundar. "Here's a rupees for yourself. Go and buy some sweet with it." Although Sundar's mother was largely responsible for his spiritual instruction, his father saw it that he had the best secular education available to him. A small primary school had been opened by an American Presbyterian mission in the village, and Sundar was enrolled as one of the pupils. Christians generally were regarded with contempt by Sikhs, Muslims, and Hindus alike. But if the missionaries from the West were prepared to supply their children with a good education, they saw no reason for not taking advantage of it. Sundar's father took a tolerant view of other religions, and the fact that the Bible was included as one of the subjects in the school curriculum did not worry him. Sundar himself, however, strongly resented it. He was a Sikh. The Granth was the Sikh's holy book and had been since the 10th Guru. When asked as he was dying whom he would name his successor, had placed his hand on it and said, "This your Guru?" The Granth commanded as deep a reverence from the Sikh as the idol in the temple from the Hindu. But the Hindus had their holy books too, such as the Bhagavad Gita. Sundar was constantly studying them since his mother and the sadhus assured him that in their teachings he would find the peace he was already longing to obtain. But this book of the displaced Christians, why should he, a Sikh, be compelled to read it? Here it explained, answered questions about its contents day after day. He was a rebel. As much as he dared, he made a nuisance of himself in class by interrupting the Bible lessons with wicked remarks and questions. For some reason which he himself would have found it difficult to explain. He really hated Christianity and everything connected with it. And when Christians evangelists turn up to preach openly in the bazaar, Sundar was the ringleader of a little group of boys who pelted them with stones before scampering off to avoid trouble. Neither of his parents knew about this, for it is certain that neither of them would have approved. Such violence was contrary to the nature and spiritual principles of his mother, while his father, though proud enough of being a Sikh, preserved a live and let live attitude towards followers of other religions. But Sundar, it seemed, always went to extremes. On the one hand, he hated Christianity violently. On the other hand, he started to practice yoga, mastering to some extent the technique by which he became oblivious of external things, immobile that he might meditate, and even attaining for brief spells the peace of soul for which he yearned. The brief spells did not last long, and back he would be in as uneasy and discontented a state as before. The great tragedy of his life occurred when he was about 14. His mother died. What her loss meant to him no one else knew. She had been the one to whom he could always turn, the one who sensed intuitively what he was feeling, the one who touched deeper chords in his spirit than any other. And now she was gone. The big courtyards, around which the flat-roofed houses of the singhs were built were alive with other members of the family. But he knew it was useless for his eyes to glance quickly around to find her. She was not there, and never would be again. She was lost forever, as far as he or anyone else who had known her was concerned. Even if she were there reborn in another form, he would not know her. The sadhus and the teachers had no comfort for him. It was the same when his elder brother, the one to whom he was especially attached, died a few months later. He, too, had been carried away on the wheel of life to be reincarnated in another unrecognizable form, and Sundar must bow to his fate in the loss of these two whom he had loved. They were taken from him. As sooner or later they must be. Anyway, the fact that it was so early in his life was his fate. It was the law of karma, the inevitability of fate, and nothing could alter it. He must accept it. All the more reason to seek for union with the Supreme Spirit, since there only can be found a peace that delivers from all feelings, either of grief or joy. Sundar continued such a search, but without the inspiration of his mother's presence and example, it was more difficult. Meanwhile, human nature that unconsciously demanded an outlet had to hit out against something. His animosity against Christianity had lain dormant for a time because with the opening of a government school 3 miles away he had been sent there, where nothing was taught to arouse his resentment. But the long daily walk to and from the school, the hot weather proved too much for him, and he was transferred back to the mission school in Rampur. Again he was compelled to study the Bible, and although against his will, he found himself attracted by some of the things he read, he was still convicted that it was false, and determined to obsess it, opposed it, eventually in quite a dramatic manner, obtaining possessions of one of the Gospels one day, and calling some of his school friends to see what he would do with it, tore it in half, then set light on it. That's what I think of it, he said defiantly, but his father, seeing what he had done, scolded him. It was the holy book of the Christians and ought not to be treated in that way. He said, if Sundar did not want it, he ought to have returned it to the missionary. It was only a few days after this incident that Sundar came to the point of desperation that led him to the decision to throw himself under the Ludhiana Express if God did not reveal to him the true way of peace. Find that way he must, either in this world or the next. He had made up his mind. At 3 o'clock in the morning, he arose from his bed and went out into the moonlit courtyard for the ceremonial bath observed by devout Hindus and Sikhs before worship. Then he returned to his room and knelt down, bowing his head to the ground. Pleading that God would reveal himself, he prayed, then waited silent and expectant, then prayed again. But nothing happened. He had not known what to expect. Whether he would hear a voice, see a vision, go into a trance, but nothing happened and time was passing in half an hour. The Ludhiana Express would come thundering along the line. He lifted his head and opened his eyes, and was rather surprised to see a faint cloud of light in the room. It was too early for the dawn, and thinking it might have come from the courtyard, he opened the door and prayed out. All was in darkness. Turning back into the room, he saw that the light in the room was getting brighter. Then, to his amazement in it, he saw the radiant figure and face, not of Buddha, not of Krishna, but of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ was there in the room, shining, radiating joy and peace, love, looking at him with compassion and asking, why do you persecute me? I died for you.